it said in a deadly whisper. The massive dragon reeled back and inhaled with sudden ferocity that flocks of birds had to flap their wings twice as fast to avoid being sucked in. Roseluck stood in place, expecting certain death to follow. Superman rolled his eyes and held out his hand. "Get behind me," he said to Roseluck. She hid behind his legs and covered her eyes. The dragon roared and let out a tsunami of flames down upon the two, bathing them in fire. Roseluck still hadn't opened her eyes, but the heat washed over her. She realized that she was still alive. She opened her eyes to see an incredible sight. Superman was standing in the center of the flames with one hand out. He was using one hand to split the fire in two around them and Roseluck. The dragon finally stopped the flames, expecting to see the two as ash. Instead, it was greeted by a stunned Roseluck and an annoyed Superman. What magic is this?" the dragon asked, shaking its head in confusion. It raised a fist over its head and started to bring it down on Superman. Roseluck once again ducked beneath the Man of Steel and covered her head with her hooves. Superman held up his arm and caught the dragon's fist in his hand. He placed his other hand under the dragon's wrist and swung the massive beast over his head. The dragon smashed into the ground with a massive shockwave as a result and blinked twice, trying to figure out what just happened. Superman floated onto its chest while Roseluck tried to remove her jaw from the ground. "Now then, what was that all about?" Superman asked the dragon, looking in its eyes. "You attacked my son," it growled, trying to get back up. Superman placed a boot on its chest and pushed it back onto the ground. "Let's get one thing clear. I did not attack your son. I only did what I had to do so I could protect that pony over there. Your son started the fight." The dragon glared at Superman, not believing a word he was saying. Superman could see the defiance in its eyes, and he shook its head with a sigh. "Well, you don't have to believe me, but if your son tries anything like that again, I will take disciplinary measures." He hopped off the dragon and walked over to where Roseluck was standing, dumbstruck. "Well, how about I give you a lift home before something else shows up?" he said to her with a smile. Roseluck could only nod as Superman scooped her up into his arms and launched the two of them into the sky. Roseluck screamed and hung on for dear life as Superman flew across the sky at speeds faster than any airship. It felt a bit like old times to him, helping someone out of a bad spot, then flying them somewhere safe. In a matter of seconds, the two were on the outskirts of the town called Ponyville. He landed about a mile away so he wouldn't be seen and gently placed Roseluck on the ground, where she immediately fell over. "Are you all right?" he asked in concern. She staggered to her hooves and gave him a weak smile. Yeah, I'm good," she muttered, trying to remain standing. "Thanks for your help. By the way, who?" But as she turned to thank him, she found that he was already gone. For a minute, she looked at the spot where he had been standing before slowly shaking her head and walking back to town. She didn't plan to tell any pony about this. She doubted any of them would believe her. She was going to go home, get the soil on her roses, and go straight to bed. As she walked back to town, a red and blue blur was heading towards the center of the Everfree Forest. Superman's first real shock since coming to this planet awaited him when he arrived in the center of the forest. He landed just a few feet away from where he had parked the ship, but it was no longer there. Superman frowned and scanned the surrounding area in hopes that maybe he had just forgotten where he parked it, but the ship was nowhere to be seen, and it certainly wasn't in the forest. His frown deepened as he wondered what could have happened to it. The most likely scenario was that a pony had stumbled across it and had managed to move it, but where would they have taken it? And if that was the case, then he'd have to meet with the populace sooner than he had wanted. "Well, if I'm lucky, they'll repair my ship while they have it," he said with a shrug, trying to be positive. He looked up at the darkening sky, amazed that it was night so soon. Then again, it was possible the days were shorter on this planet. He watched as the moon slowly rose into the sky. Wait. While he was watching the moon rise, he thought that he had seen what looked like a Pegasus unicorn thing flying in front of the moon. He had heard of Pegasi and unicorns, but never a hybrid of the two. Help! The cry snapped Superman out of his thoughts, and he launched himself skyward towards the sound of the distress call. He flew extra fast, not just because someone needed help, but also because he had heard 3 screams, 3 voices that were very familiar to him. Excuse the interruption of your program, but it feels as though he just implied that if there was just one life, he wouldn't save them as quickly. Just a thought, just a thought. How much trouble can 3 fillies get into in one day? He asked himself within a few seconds. He was hovering over the place where he had heard the cry. He looked around and found his suspicions were confirmed. The 3 fillies he had met earlier were trapped against a tree in the forest, with about 10 wolves surrounding them. He didn't have time to examine the wolves, as one of them headed straight for the fillies. They screamed and closed their eyes. Boom! Superman landed feet first in front of the wolves. The force of the landing blasted them away from the fillies. The 3 fillies opened their eyes slowly. Huge smiles spread on their faces when they saw who had shown up. "Superman!" they all cried out at once. Superman turned his head to smile at them, letting them know that they were safe. "I don't know if you can understand me, but I would leave if I were you," he said to the wolves. Turning his attention back to them, they snarled and rushed at him. He sighed and got ready to fight. No one seemed to be taking his advice today. The first wolf lunged into the air right at his throat, but was blown away by a gust of super breath. It hit a tree and splintered, gaining Superman's interest. Odd. They seem to be made of wood. Does that mean they're not alive? He grabbed one of the wolves by the throat and activated his X-ray vision, scanning the wolf's insides. The entire thing was made out of wood, not just the exterior. There was nothing that indicated that it was alive. That meant he no longer had to hold back. He tossed the wolf he was holding into another one that was charging at him, before flying into the 2 and slammed them against the tree. The wolves weren't even sawdust before Superman flew into another wolf and slammed it into the ground. The 2 wolves jumped at him while he had his back turned, only to be caught with an insane clothesline as Superman swung his arm into them. The remaining wolves realized that it was a hopeless battle, and fled back into the woods. He smiled as he watched them go, whereas the fillies taunted the wolves. "That's right, you only had to deal with him. Next time you gotta fight me," Scootaloo yelled at the retreating wolves. One turned around and snarled at her. She screamed and hid behind Superman's leg. The other 2 ran up to him with huge smiles. "Thanks for the help, Superman," Sweetie Belle said with a smile. Superman rolled his eyes at the pun on his name, but smiled nonetheless. "How'd you know we'd need help?" Apple Bloom asked. "I told you. Whenever you need help, you just need to call out, and I'll be there," he reminded her. Scootaloo came out from behind Superman's legs as he began to question them. "All right, why are you 3 in the forest at night? How'd you even—" Superman dodged to the side as a bolt of dark energy whizzed by his head. The filly screamed as the bolt landed a few feet from them. Superman immediately placed himself between the 3 fillies and the attacker. His eyes narrowed on his opponent, who landed a yard away from them. She, he assumed it was a she, was a little shorter than he was, but she had a glare that seemed to pierce his invulnerable skin. She had a unicorn's horn that crackled with power and a Pegasus wings that seemed to tremble with rage. She was midnight blue with a black crown on her forehead. Superman recognized her as the odd pony that he had seen flying across the sky earlier. And she was mad.